Welcome to the deep dive. We take the sources, we dig in, and we pull out what you really need to know. Saves you time, gets you informed. So today we're tackling a really big one, immigration and enforcement. It's probably one of the most complicated, definitely emotionally charged issues out there. And it gets right down to these basic questions, doesn't it? Like who gets to come into a country? What are the rules? How do you actually, protect borders? And then there's that really tough balancing act between, say, national security and, well, our humanitarian
It's
responsibilities.
huge. And immigration, I mean, our sources are pretty clear on this. It drives so much economic growth, cultural diversity, innovation. It's a major force.
Yeah.
But yeah, it also kicks off these intense debates, jobs, security, identity, sovereignty. It touches everything. And what we're really zeroing in on today is the enforcement side. So the laws, the actual procedures, the agencies that regulate who comes in, who stays, and deal with unauthorized entry. It sits right at that messy intersection of law, policy, ethics, and human rights.
Okay, so that's our mission for this deep dive then. Let's unpack all these different facets using the sources you've brought together. Right, let's get into it. Because people moving around the globe, I mean, that's not new, is it?
Not all.
People have always moved. Conflict, trade, colonization, sadly, slavery, seeking opportunity, just basic survival. So how did all that movement, shape the world we see now, set the stage for today?
Well, if you look back, especially the 19th and 20th centuries, you saw these enormous waves of immigration. Think U.S., Canada, Australia, parts of Europe. And these weren't just, numbers changing. They actively built the multicultural societies we have now. But what's really interesting, and the sources point this out, is that it wasn't always an open door, not even close. You had things like the U.S.-Chinese Exclusion Act in 1882 or the Immigration Act of 1924. These weren't just about restricting numbers. They brought in explicit racial quotas, really limiting certain groups. It shows this tension right from the start between maybe needing labor and this sort of fear of change.
That quota system is quite revealing.
Definitely. Then fast forward past World War II, and things change again, dramatically. You've got huge numbers of refugees displaced by the war. And alongside that, you see the rise of guest worker programs. Germany's Gastarbeiter policy is probably the best known example. These were often meant to be temporary fixes for labor shortages, but, well, many people ended up staying, building new communities.
Okay, so that covers a lot of ground. Big migrations, post-war refugees, guest workers. But now, 21st century, things feel different again. What's driving global migration now?
It's still complex, but the drivers today often feel maybe more immediate, more urgent. We're seeing massive movements because of ongoing wars, Syria, Afghanistan, places like that. But also, and this is huge, the growing impact of climate change. Plus, persistent poverty, political instability, it's all interconnected, pushing millions to look for safety elsewhere.
Right, climate change is definitely becoming a bigger piece of this puzzle.
Absolutely.
So we've talked a bit about the why. Let's shift to the how. This is where it gets really interesting, I think. What are the actual tools, the core methods countries use to manage who comes in and who doesn't?
Okay, so a big part of it starts with border control. And that's more than just walls or fences, although those get a lot of attention. The sources really emphasize the tech side now. Surveillance drones, biometric data like fingerprints, facial recognition. It's getting very sophisticated. Plus, you have dedicated agencies. Like in the U.S., it's Customs and Border Protection, CBP. In the EU, you hear about Frontex a lot, and it's not just about stopping entry, it's also about tracking people who enter legally, making sure they leave when their visa or stay expires. These entry-exit systems are a major logistical undertaking.
Okay, so high-tech surveillance, dedicated agencies, tracking systems. It's a much broader picture than just a fence.
Exactly.
What about before someone even gets to a border?
Right, good point. Because enforcement really starts way before that, with visa and legal entry systems. This is where countries decide who gets permission to enter in the first place, under what conditions, and for how long. Our sources lay out the common types: work visas, student visas, asylum status, family reunification, tourist visas. That decision, grant or deny the visa, that's often the very first and maybe the most significant act of enforcement.
So the paperwork, the application process itself is a form of control.
Absolutely. It sets the parameters.
Okay, so systems are set up for legal entry. But inevitably, rules get broken, situations change, people overstay. What happens then?
Well, that's where deportation and removal policies kick in. This is the formal legal process of expelling someone who's violated immigration laws. It could be for unauthorized entry, staying longer than a visa allows, or sometimes for committing certain crimes. And what comes up again and again in the sources from critics are concerns about fairness. Due process. Do people have adequate legal help? Do they understand the complex system, especially when the stakes are so high?
Yeah, the fairness aspect seems crucial.
Definitely. And connected to that are detention centers. These are facilities where immigrants might be held while their case is processed or while they're waiting for deportation. And these centers face intense scrutiny. Conditions inside, the psychological impact, especially on children, the issue of families being separated, and sometimes people being held indefinitely. It's highly controversial.
Right, the detention centers are often in the news.
They are. And then there's interior enforcement. This is less visible sometimes, but just as impactful. Think raids on workplaces or homes, sanctions against employers who hire undocumented workers, and also this increasing collaboration we see between local police and federal immigration authorities, like ICE in the U.S. It kind of blurs the lines between regular law enforcement and immigration control, and it can really affect entire communities.
Okay, that paints a picture of a multi-layered system: border, visas, detention, interior enforcement. So, stepping back, what are the big legal frameworks, the institutions that actually govern all this, nationally and internationally?
Good question, because it varies, but there are common threads. So in the United States, it's mainly the Department of Homeland Security, DHS. Underneath DHS, you have agencies we've mentioned, ICE for interior stuff, USCIS handling legal immigration like visas and citizenship, and CBP at the border, key laws. The Immigration and Nationality Act, the INA, that's sort of the foundation. Then you have things like the REAL ID Act, setting standards for state IDs, often linked to immigration status. And post 9/11, the Patriot Act had huge implications, expanding surveillance and tying immigration much more closely to national security.
Okay, so a big federal structure in the U.S. How does it compare to Europe?
Europe is interesting because it's layered. You have the Schengen Agreement, which created that zone of free movement between many member states. No internal border checks, mostly. But then you have the Dublin regulation, which is crucial for asylum. It dictates which EU country is responsible for handling an asylum seeker's claim. The idea is to prevent someone applying in multiple countries. On top of that, each country has its own national immigration laws. And EU Frontex helps manage the external borders of the Schengen area.
So a mix of EU-wide rules and national laws.
Exactly. And then there's the international law layer. This is really important. The 1951 Refugee Convention is fundamental. It defines what a refugee is, what rights they have, especially the right not to be sent back to danger non-refoulement. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights also states everyone has the right to seek asylum from persecution. And you have key organizations like the IOM, the International Organization for Migration, and UNHCR, the UN Refugee Agency. They provide aid, support governments in managing migration, and advocate for protecting migrants and refugees.
Right. So national systems, regional agreements like the EU's, and this bedrock of international law. Now, this is where things get really contentious, isn't it? Where policy meets real lives and the debates get heated. What are the major flashpoints?
Oh, absolutely. Number one, probably, is undocumented immigration. You've got millions living and working without legal status in many countries, and the debate just swings back and forth. Should there be pathways to legal status, regularization, or should the focus be purely on stricter enforcement and removal? It touches everything: economics, social fabric, ideas of who belongs.
That debate seems perpetual.
It really does. And closely related is the challenge of asylum seekers and refugees. Countries, especially those on the front lines, often struggle with large influxes. People seeking asylum can face incredibly long waits for decisions, live in limbo with uncertain status, or have their claims denied. And a really concerning trend highlighted in our sources is some countries basically criminalizing the act of crossing a border to seek asylum, or putting up barriers that make it almost impossible to claim protection. That pushes right up against international obligations.
Yeah, and we hear these heartbreaking stories sometimes, especially around family separation. What do the sources say about the real impact of policies like that, the human rights angle?
It's a deeply troubling area. Policies like family separation at the U.S.-Mexico border, for instance, drew huge international criticism, and rightly so. Our sources are really clear. These policies inflict unique and severe harm, especially on children. The psychological trauma, the legal risks for vulnerable people. It raises fundamental questions about human rights and a state's duty of care.
It's hard to even fathom the impact on a child.
It is. Then there's the whole economic impacts debate. You hear both sides constantly, and both appear in our sources. One side argues immigrants fill essential jobs, pay taxes, start businesses, bring dynamism, especially to aging populations. The other side raises concerns about potential wage depression for low-skilled native workers or strain on public services like schools or healthcare. What's also interesting is how enforcement itself has economic ripples. Like crackdowns in agriculture or construction can lead to labor shortages, affecting food prices or building costs. It's not just about the border.
That's a good point, the ripple effects of enforcement.
Yeah. And then national security. Post 9/11, this link became incredibly strong. It led to things we now see as almost standard. Travel bans, more intensive vetting, biometric tracking. The risk, as highlighted in the sources, is when immigration gets framed primarily as a security threat. It can overshadow the economic and humanitarian aspects and lead to overly broad, potentially discriminatory policies.
Treating everyone as a potential threat instead of seeing the complexity.
Exactly. And finally, there's this trend towards the criminalization of migration. More and more, simply violating immigration rules, which used to be mostly a civil matter, is being treated like a crime, leading to detention, sometimes imprisonment. This shift changes the whole narrative. It can equate seeking a better life or fleeing danger with actual criminal behavior, which makes finding humane solutions much harder.
Okay, those are some major challenges and debates. To make it more concrete, let's look at some specific places. How do these things play out on the ground?
Good idea. Let's take the United States. Estimates are around 11 million undocumented immigrants. Enforcement is vast. Border Patrol, ICE, doing interior enforcement, deportation programs. And you've had really controversial policies recently. Title 42, used during the pandemic for rapid expulsions, often bypassing asylum claims, and the Remain in Mexico policy, forcing asylum seekers to wait south of the border. Huge debates about effectiveness versus human cost.
Right, those were definitely in the headlines. What about the EU? You mentioned the internal divisions earlier.
Yes, the European Union really felt the pressure from conflicts in the Middle East and North Africa, and it split the bloc. Germany famously took in a very large number of refugees around 2015. But other countries, like Hungary, built fences, took a very hard line. Frontline states like Greece and Italy have struggled immensely and faced criticism for pushbacks of boats carrying migrants. It really tested that idea of shared EU responsibility.
A real stress test for the Union. Now, Australia is often cited for its tough approach, right?
Very much so. Australia has its policy of offshore detention processing asylum seekers who arrive by boat in centers on islands like Nauru. This policy has been slammed by human rights groups for years due to harsh conditions and the psychological toll of indefinite detention. It's a clear example of a policy designed primarily for deterrence.
A very different model. And the UK, especially after Brexit.
The United Kingdom, post-Brexit, is really focused on taking back control, as they put it.
Yeah.
So there's a new points-based system for legal migration, trying to select for specific skills, and alongside that, a major focus on stopping unauthorized crossings of the English Channel, mostly by small boats. It's a shift towards tighter national control after leaving the EU's free movement framework.
Okay, so different countries, different tactics, but facing similar pressures. Connecting all this back, it's impossible to ignore the human element, the ethical side. What are the big humanitarian dimensions we really need to keep in mind?
This is so critical, and the sources really drive it home. First, the sheer danger of irregular migration routes, people dying crossing the Mediterranean or deserts like the Sonoran. It's a tragic reality. And importantly, these dangerous journeys often happen because safe legal pathways are limited or closed off. This desperation fuels smuggling networks and human trafficking. They prey on vulnerability.
The lack of options creates the market for smugglers.
Precisely. And we touched on it before, but the psychological trauma, particularly for children, whether they're detained, separated, or traveling alone, it's profound and can last a lifetime. Plus, there's the persistent issue of racial profiling and discrimination that can creep into enforcement practices. It undermines basic dignity. This is where organizations like Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, Doctors Without Borders play such a vital role. They document abuses, provide aid, and constantly advocate for approaches based on rights and humanity.
Right, their work is essential for accountability.
Absolutely.
So looking ahead now, what's on the horizon? What new challenges or maybe potential solutions do the sources point towards?
Well, one huge challenge looming is climate migration. It's unavoidable. Rising sea levels, drought, extreme weather. We're talking potentially tens of millions displaced in the coming decades. Our current systems just aren't built for that scale or type of movement. It demands new thinking, new legal frameworks potentially.
That feels like a game changer.
It really does. Then there's technology, AI, and surveillance. Governments are adopting facial recognition, using predictive analytics to try and guess migration flows or identify risks, developing smart borders. This brings efficiency, maybe, but also huge questions about privacy, algorithmic bias, are certain groups being unfairly targeted, and basic civil liberties.
The double-edged sword of technology.
Exactly. On the potentially more positive side, some sources discuss pathways to legalization. There's ongoing debate in several countries about reforms that could offer permanent residency or even citizenship to long-term undocumented residents who put down roots. It's often framed as both humane and pragmatic economically.
Bringing people out of the shadows, as they say.
Right. And that ties into the need for transnational cooperation. These are global issues. Our sources stress that effective solutions require countries working together, multilateral talks, addressing the root causes that push people to leave their homes, and figuring out how to share the responsibility more equitably. One country can't solve this alone.
Makes sense. It's a shared challenge.
Definitely. Underlying all of this is public opinion and political will. Immigration is always a hot-button issue in elections. Populist movements often gain traction by promising tougher enforcement. Other political forces advocate for more inclusion and reform. Public mood and political leadership will massively shape which direction policies go.
So politics and public feeling are really driving the bus here.
In many ways, yes.
Okay, let's try and wrap this up. When you pull all these threads together, the history, the methods, the laws, the debates, the human cost, what's the core takeaway? It feels like this constant tension.
I think that's exactly it. The core tension is between a nation's undeniable right to control its borders, to maintain sovereignty, and its equally important obligations under international law and basic ethics to protect human rights and uphold human dignity. Finding solutions means navigating that difficult space. Our sources suggest it requires more than just enforcement. It needs creative policy, empathy, and a long-term view.
So it really boils down to balancing sovereignty with dignity.
That's a good way to put it. Countries have rights, but they also have responsibilities.
It seems the future really depends on whether we as a global community can manage migration with, well, more than just fences and force, maybe with more foresight, more fairness, and, dare I say, compassion. What really stands out to weigh you from this deep dive we've done? And maybe, for everyone listening, how do you think these powerful forces, security, economy, humanity, will shape the world you live in over the next few years? Something to think about.